If one of these schlubs, like the two schlubs out there in Manhattan and Atlanta, decide, you know, we're going to indict this president. Well, what if 10 of them decide to indict the president? They have effectively crippled the executive branch of the federal government. In Article 6 of the Constitution, there's a little provision in there, there's a little language in there, which we call the Supremacy Clause. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means if you have a conflict of federal and state law, well, federal law prevails. If you have a conflict of constitutional law between the federal Constitution and, let's say, the Georgia Constitution, well, the federal Constitution prevails. If you have a conflict between the federal Constitution and a state statute, the federal Constitution prevails. If you have a conflict between a federal statute and a state constitutional provision, the federal statute prevails. Some of you may not like it, doesn't matter, that's where it is. That's what the Constitution provides, the Supremacy Clause. Now, I want you to think about this. You keep hearing on TV, even from legal analysts who we consider friends and are very sharp, that a president of the United States cannot pardon himself if he's indicted by a state. You've heard this over and over again? Because it's not a federal law, and he can only pardon himself on federal laws. Now, that's incorrect. Stick with me, I know what I'm talking about, and what I'm about to tell you will be common fare in about 3-4 months. You'll hear the repetition of this from the backbenchers. What does the Constitution say about indicting a president? Nothing. It says nothing. Really, nothing. What does the Constitution say about a president pardoning himself? Nothing. It says nothing. He didn't think that we'd become such a stupid people that we would be doing these kinds of stupid things, but there you go. However, there are 2 memos in the Department of Justice, the Office of Legal Counsel. I've touched on this, but now I need to elaborate on it because this is getting out of control. 1973, the Nixon Justice Department, and 2000, the Bill Clinton Justice Department. They were looking at these issues for obvious reasons. Because people were looking at indicting Nixon as president, and people were looking at indicting Clinton as president. Neither were indicted as president. The position of the Office of Legal Counsel, which is the constitutional unit within the Department of Justice that gives advice to the Department of Justice and the President of the United States through the Attorney General, a division that was once led by William Rehnquist and another man you may have heard from, Antonin Scalia. So they're really the smartest of the smart. The position from both Departments of Justice under both parties, and now the accepted and embraced position, is you cannot indict a sitting president. Why? To cut to the chase, and the argument is overwhelmingly smart, and I agree with it. You can't have a president indicted, meeting with lawyers constantly, going over evidence constantly, looking for exculpatory information constantly, being subjected to potential depositions, being subjected to grand juries, being subjected to fighting for his liberty, while at the same time running the executive branch, 1/3 of the branch of the United States government. Now that makes sense to everybody, right? You really can't. Now you can indict him after, which we've never done, but you can't indict him while he's president. That is the position, the official position of the United States Department of Justice under both parties. Got it. Now, so the question is this. If Donald Trump were to be indicted, which he has been, and let's say he's convicted of a count or 2, and he's elected president of the United States, and let's say we're talking about Jack Smith cases, clearly he can pardon himself. Those are federal cases. But what you're hearing from my friend John Turley, you're hearing from Andy McCarthy, and you're hearing from others, they're saying, but the problem in Georgia and Manhattan is he cannot pardon himself from state or local indictments or convictions when he becomes president, because it only applies to federal charges. Where's that written? Nowhere. So why do you say that? Because they mistakenly say, compare that to, can a president pardon Ernie Grabotsky, who's been convicted of state violations in Georgia? Maybe he's serving time, maybe he's not. Can he pardon that person? No. He can't pardon that person. Why? Because that's state law. You can't pardon that. But Mark, you just said that the President of the United States can pardon himself if he's charged or convicted on a state law, right? Right, Mr. Producer? So how can that happen? It's simple. It's the same argument they make on federal law. That has nothing to do with indictment and or conviction of a president of the United States or somebody who becomes president. Ernie Grabotsky, the 1973 and 2000 memos that the Department of Justice wrote have nothing to do with Ernie Grabotsky. Period. It has nothing to do with the Supremacy Clause. Because a president just reaching into a state and deciding that he's going to pardon Ernie Grabotsky for violating some state law, there's no authority there. There's no federal law that backs that up. The Constitution doesn't back that up. It's none of his business. But if the president himself has been indicted and or convicted as a candidate and he's elected as president by the American people to run the executive branch, it doesn't matter who's indicted him. It doesn't matter under what authority he's been convicted, whether it's federal or state. The argument applies either way. That is, you can't have a president of the United States fighting to defend his liberty, whether it is a rogue DA in Manhattan, a rogue DA in Atlanta, a rogue federal prosecutor in Washington, D.C., he's still fighting for his liberty. So the argument is the same, which is, of course, the president has the right to pardon himself against any indictment or any conviction from anywhere in the corner of the United States. Do you understand what I'm saying? Mr. Producer, if you don't, tell me, seriously. So in other words, the issue is he can't fight for his liberty and run the country at the same time. So how can you say, well, that only applies if he's indicted at the federal level? No, it applies no matter what. He has to fight for his liberty in Georgia while he's president of the United States. So the thinking is, okay, so there are thousands of DAs and assistant DAs across the country, literally thousands. So if one of these schlubs, like the two schlubs out there in Manhattan and Atlanta, decide, you know, we're going to indict this president. Well, what if 10 of them decide to indict the president? They have effectively crippled the executive branch of the federal government. And that's the point. A state prosecutor can do it, a county prosecutor can do it, a federal prosecutor can do it. The belief is, and I agree with it, that you should not be able to indict a sitting president, let alone convict him of federal violations. Well, then you shouldn't be able to do the same under any other circumstance either. And to further back us up, what did I tell you when I started? Article 6, the Supremacy Clause. A state can't cripple the federal executive branch so that it can't function. Or the Democrats will do this to every Republican president they want to do it to. That's the danger that they've created here.
For all this and much more, sign up for Levin TV.